This is the part of the presentation that I didn't have time to cover with you last week. I'm sorry that I ran out of time, and here it is. Basically, it's a previous recording that I'm just putting up for you so you can follow it through on the PowerPoint, but you've got it on your prints as well, so use it whichever you wish. Okay, so finally then, I'll just sort of sum up some of this. Laissez-faire and interventionism, or not quite finally, but basically these free market policies were directly responsible for causing the tremendous number of deaths in that crisis. So, okay, people noticed that, people were aware of that. So how come those policies actually carried on right through the 19th century? How come even today free market policies are still being pushed forward as a positive thing for the economy? Well, okay, one of the things going back to the Victorian period would be these corn laws that I talked about at the beginning. And that until the time of the famine, before the famine, the main form of intervention in the markets had been these corn laws. And they weren't there for the benefit of the poor people. They were there, as I've said already, to benefit the rich. So interventionism wasn't seen particularly as a way of helping the poor. Robert Peel, as I just mentioned him as the Prime Minister, and he actually took a strong step. He lost his position as Prime Minister in the end, partly because he was fighting to put an end to the corn laws, which were finally stopped during the course of the famine. And his hope was that, you know, if you put an end to this interventionism, the Irish people will have a chance to buy corn and bread at lower prices as an alternative to potatoes. But as I've already explained, these people are not in a position to pay anything by this stage. It had gone too far. They were starving in the streets. So, unfortunately, his actions didn't have the result that he hoped for. And by this stage, you got millions of Irish people who are simply destitute with nothing at all, and they've got no money, they can't buy corn, they can't buy anything. So freeing up the market, just as I said, means that food that was grown in Ireland was shipped out of the country to England, where people could pay higher prices for it. And yeah, okay, now finally, let's just sum up there. There wasn't a history of intervention being used to help the poor. And the corn laws were just there seemingly to make the rich richer. And there's a whole kind of philosophy of self-reliance. You don't help people to help themselves by helping them. You get them to help. You make them go out there and do it for themselves, help themselves. That way they get tough, and that way they'll fight they'll fight for what they've got. If you just give them, they'll just become lazy. All right. Again, you still find that as it's a basic right-wing idea that you'll still find today. But at the same time, there was a recognition that if you just let poverty and deprivation spread without doing anything, it's going to lead to terrible results. Dickens gives us this warning. Well, he writes about it a lot, okay? But he particularly, when he, I've shown one version of this before, but here's another version. In Christmas Carol, you've got ignorance and want. If you don't intervene, if you don't do anything, they'll grow up. What will they be when they grow up? They'll be criminals. All right? There'll be a huge criminal underclass. If they don't have a revolution, on the one hand, they'll form a criminal underclass. The Victorian dream, the miracle of the Victorian economy will be undermined if you just let this carry on. You can't just let it carry on. Okay, so there's an awareness that some kind of interventionism is necessary. Either in terms of a criminal underclass or a revolution. If you don't do something for the very, very poor, you're going to have trouble. All right, the French Revolution was always in the background for Britain, always kind of looking across the English Channel and saying, God, I hope that doesn't happen here, because the French Revolution was very simple. Kill the rich. Just kill them. Just kill the rich. Okay, this whole privileged generation that's grown up and has never worked in its life and doesn't know what it is to work and lives in fantastic luxury while the rest of us suffer. Chop their heads off. Invent a new machine that will chop people's heads off efficiently so we can chop hundreds of heads off a day. Boom, boom, boom. Okay? And of course, the elite of Britain were terrified that that could happen in Britain. All right, so just from a practical point of view, that was the recognition. You have to do something. You can't just let them die on the streets. So basically, then the government over the 19th century had the policy of giving the mass of people, the working class, the poor, giving them enough to stop them from rioting, enough to stop them from having a kind of revolution against the state, but never giving them, everything they wanted. Okay, a few years later they'd be knocking on the door again, saying, "We want this, we want something else now. We want more reforms." And again, the government would give them some sort of compromise. Oh, give them a bit, give them something, keep them satisfied, keep them happy. And so, over the course of the century, all these reforms took place. Basically, the motivation was not, let's help those poor people, but, oh God, it's going to be a problem for the whole society if we don't do something, so let's do something. Okay? Keep the market running smoothly. Is in its basic efficient way of running. Because capitalism in itself just doesn't really have any moral responsibility. It's not what capitalism is about. All that capitalism wants is a labour force that is alive and able to work and can produce enough goods for the rich to consume. That's all that capitalism needs. Okay, so it doesn't really care beyond that. But looking outside that narrow limit, people could see the danger. People could see that you're either going to have a revolution or you're going to have a huge criminal class that's going to undermine the society. So that's why over the course of the century you get intervention developing more and more. And these various acts of parliament were made so that conditions in factories were made better, mines and coal mines and things like that. Taxpayers' money is being used more and more to finance, projects like education for the poor. Trade unions, kumiai, they were illegal, until later part of the 18th century. People were severely punished for getting together to try and improve their rights. So these kinds of things were developing over the course of the century, but there still wasn't anything like, Hokeng, health insurance, Nenking, old age pensions, those kinds of things. They developed in the 20th century, really. They're not a feature of Victorian society. Really, we would say that the reason behind their interventionism was not like, let's help the poor. or let's help the working classes, or anything like that. Their interventionism would simply be, this is getting in the way of the smooth running of the market. Let's just do what we need to do to keep the market going. And that would be the main sort of strategic thinking. Okay. Okay, so that's about it then, really, for that particular topic. I haven't talked as much as I wanted to about Dickens's involvement in that. I've said something. There are a few more things I could say, and perhaps we'll bring those up in later classes.